Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are tackling something that sounds incredibly academic on the surface, like something you'd read on a syllabus and immediately forget. But I promise you, it is actually the invisible architecture of your entire life.
It is.
We are talking about the psychological foundations of curriculum.
That does sound a bit dry when you say it like that. It sounds like a dusty seminar room.
Yeah.
But you're right. It is essentially the operating system of how we learn, how we think, and ultimately who we become.
Exactly. I think most people hear the word curriculum and they picture a stack of textbooks.
Right.
Or maybe that heavy backpack you lugged around in high school.
Sure. Physical stuff.
But after going through these sources, I've realized curriculum isn't just a list of topics or a table of contents. It's a designed environment. It's a theory of the human mind put into practice.
That is the perfect way to frame it. I mean, every time you walk into a classroom or even a corporate training seminar, or let's be honest, even when you open a language learning app on your phone to practice Spanish for 5 minutes, you are stepping inside a specific psychological theory. Someone, somewhere, decided how you function as a human being and designed that experience to match that theory.
And the range of those experiences is just wild. I mean, we have sources here describing everything from a child sitting rigidly in a row of desks, essentially bolted to the floor.
Which is a very specific design choice.
Yeah.
That's not accidental at all.
To a student using an iPad to analyze Cold War politics by, linking out to the History Channel app and making their own documentary. Those are two totally different worlds, but they are both curriculum.
Precisely. And the mission for this deep dive is to unpack the engine under the hood of those experiences. We have a massive stack of research here, texts on curriculum theory, history of psychology, classroom management guides. And what we find is that there are really three massive schools of thought that have been sort of fighting for the soul of education for the last century.
The big three, I like a good trilogy. It makes things easier to organize in my head.
It really is a trilogy. We have behaviorism, which is, you could say, the machine metaphor. Then you have cognitive psychology, which is all about the information processing in the mind. Think of it like the computer metaphor.
Right.
And finally, we have phenomenology or humanistic psychology, which is about the whole person, the soul, the emotions, all of it.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the machine. Behaviorism. This feels like the bedrock of the traditional school system.
It absolutely is. Behaviorism is the worldview that dominated the early 20th century and, frankly, still dominates a lot of what we do today, not just in schools, but in corporate training, in advertising, even in those language apps we mentioned.
This is the stimulus response stuff, right? Like Pavlov's dog drooling at a bell.
It is related to that, for sure. That's a piece of it. But in the context of curriculum and how humans learn complex tasks, we really need to look at a guy named Edward Thorndike.
Okay.
He's often called the father of behavioral psychology in education.
And he started with cats. I feel like we need to paint the picture for the listener because this is really where modern education begins in a way. It's 1898. We aren't in a classroom. We're in a lab. And Edward Thorndike has built these crates.
Puzzle boxes, he called them. And they were crude. Slats of wood, a simple latch, maybe a loop of string, very DIY.
And inside one of these boxes, he places a cat, a hungry cat, importantly.
Yes, the motivation has to be there.
And outside the flats, just out of reach, is a bowl of fish. Now, if you or I were in that box, we'd look for the latch, we'd analyze the mechanism, we'd think, okay, this string lifts that bolt. We try to figure it out.
Exactly. We'd use insight. We would construct a mental model of the lock.
Right.
But Thorndike wanted to know, does the cat use insight? Does it sit there, stroke its whiskers, and think, aha, the string is connected to the pulley?
And the answer was?
Absolutely not. Not even close. The cat goes berserk. The sources describe it vividly. It claws the wood, it bites the bars, it thrusts its paws through any openings it can find. It is pure, chaotic, random energy.
It's just thrashing.
It's trial and error in the most literal sense. Thrashing until, purely by accident, a paw just happens to swipe the latch. Click. Door falls open. The cat gets out and eats the fish.
Okay, so one lucky swipe. That doesn't really prove learning, does it? That just proves that chaos works if you wait long enough.
Not on its own. But then Thorndike puts the cat back in the box. Now, if the cat had insight, if it understood the mechanism, it would immediately swipe the latch again, right?
Right. It would say, oh, I know this trick now.
But it doesn't. Not at all. The cat goes berserk again. It thrashes, bites, claws. But, and this is the data point that changed the world, It thrashes for a slightly shorter amount of time before it accidentally hits the latch.
So it's a slow curve. It's not a sudden aha moment.
It's a learning curve, exactly.
Yeah.
Over dozens and dozens of trials, the useless behaviors, the biting, the meowing, the scratching at the floor, they gradually fade away. They get stamped out, in his words.
And the one specific behavior that works, the latch swipe, gets stamped in. That sounds remarkably mechanical.
It is mechanical. And that's the law of effect. It completely removed the mind from the equation. Thorndike argued that learning isn't a thinking process. It's a physiological connection. A connection between a specific situation and a specific impulse.
So if I do something and get a cookie, the wiring in my brain literally strengthens that connection. If I do something and get a mild electric shock, the wiring weakens.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
This is called connectionism. Learning, according to Thorndike, is just a physiological connection between a stimulus and a response. It's all about habit formation. There's no insight, there's no aha moment. It's just wiring.
And this is where it gets really interesting for schools. Because before Thorndike, people had this idea that learning Latin was good because it exercised the brain like a muscle.
Right, the doctrine of mental discipline. This was huge in the 19th century. The idea was that the brain was like a bicep. If you learned really difficult things, Latin, Greek, geometry, your brain just got sharper in general.
Even if you never use Latin again in your life.
Exactly. The exercise was supposed to make you smarter overall.
And Thorndike came along and said, actually, no, that's not how it works.
He completely destroyed that theory. He did the research. He found that learning Latin doesn't help you learn math. Learning is specific. If you want someone to be good at adding numbers, you teach them to add numbers. You don't teach them Greek and hope that skill somehow transfers over.
This sounds incredibly practical, but it must have led to this massive shift in how we build curriculum. It feels like this is the moment education became an industry.
It is. It really is. We see the influence on guys like Ralph Tyler and Hilda Taba. Ralph Tyler is often considered the father of the curriculum movement. He took Thorndike's scientific step-by-step approach and turned it into a factory model for schools.
The factory metaphor is everywhere in this era, isn't it?
Well, it is. You have to remember, this is the era of Frederick Taylor and scientific management. Taylor was the guy going into factories with stopwatches, measuring exactly how long it took a worker to move a shovel from point A to point B.
He wanted to maximize efficiency.
To the second. And they looked at schools and thought, why can't we do that with kids?
And they applied that thinking to children.
They absolutely did. Tyler's model is very rational and very linear. You start with objectives. You define exactly what you want the student to be able to do at the end.
Okay.
Then you select the learning experiences that will produce that behavior. Then you organize those experiences in a logical sequence. And at the end, you evaluate to see if it worked.
It's an assembly line. Raw material comes in. That's the student. You process them through the experiences. You test them at the end for quality control. If they match the specs, they graduate.
Exactly. And the objectives had to be specific,
Yeah.
observable. You couldn't just say the student will appreciate art. That's too vague, too fuzzy.
You can't measure appreciation with a stopwatch.
I can't. So you have to say something like, the student will list 3 primary colors. It has to be observable. It follows what they call the ABCD rule. Audience, behavior, condition, and degree. The student, audience, will identify the capital of France behavior on a blank map condition with 100% accuracy degree. If you can't measure it, it doesn't exist in this worldview.
That is so incredibly dry, but I see why it caught on. It's measurable. It feels scientific. It gives administrators something concrete to point to.
It's very safe. It produces data. But then we have the heavyweight champion of behaviorism who came a bit later, B.F. Skinner.
Skinner. Yeah, he took Thorndike's ideas and just supercharged them. He's the one most people associate with this stuff, with the Skinner boxes and the pigeons.
He did. He moved from simple reflexes, what's called elicited responses, to what he called operant conditioning.
Okay, what is the distinction there? Because I feel like conditioning is just conditioning to most people.
It's a key difference.
Yeah.
Classical conditioning, like Pavlov's dog, is about involuntary reflexes.
Mhm.
You hit a knee, the leg kicks. You smell food, you salivate. You don't choose to do that.
Right, it just happened.
Skinner was interested in operant behavior, behavior you emit, behavior you choose to do that operates on the environment, and then the environment reacts to it.
Okay, so the rat in the box presses a bar and a food pellet drops. The rat chose to press the bar. It wasn't a reflex.
Exactly. And that whole sequence is the 3-term contingency. This is the holy grail of behaviorism. You have the discriminative stimulus, which is the A.
A for antecedent.
Right. Then the response, which is the B for behavior, and the reinforcing stimulus, which is the C for consequence, the ABC model. Antecedent, behavior, consequence.
So the antecedent is the trigger, the thing that sets the stage.
Yes. A light goes on in the cage.
Yeah.
That light is the stimulus that tells the rat, hey, the bar is active now. Pressing it will do something.
The behavior is the rat pressing the bar.
And the consequence is the food pellet, the reinforcer.
Now, Skinner was very, very specific about reinforcement. I feel like people mess this up all the time. Positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement. I always hear people say negative reinforcement when they actually mean punishment.
They do, and it drives psychologists crazy. Let's clear it up because it's so important. Reinforcement always increases a behavior. That's the definition. If the behavior happens more often in the future, it was reinforced, period.
Okay. So positive reinforcement is adding something good.
Yes. You add a desirable stimulus. You give the rat a food pellet. You give the student a gold star. You give an employee a bonus. You are adding something to increase the likelihood of that behavior.
Simple enough. And negative reinforcement.
Negative reinforcement is taking away something bad, something aversive.
Can you give me a classroom example of that?
Sure. Imagine a teacher who is yelling at the class to be quiet. Quiet down, sit down. I'm not going to start until you're all quiet. It's annoying, right? It's an aversive stimulus.
Definitely.
The moment the class finally sits down and shuts up, the teacher stops yelling. The removal of the annoying yelling reinforces the quiet behavior.
So the students learn. If we sit down, the unpleasant noise stops. The removal of the bad thing makes the quiet behavior more likely next time.
That's it, exactly.
So what is punishment then?
Punishment is totally distinct. Punishment is designed to decrease a behavior. You add something bad, like a detention, or you take away something good, like phone privileges. But Skinner actually thought punishment was largely ineffective.
Really? Why?
He believed it just suppressed behavior temporarily, but it didn't teach a new, correct behavior. It creates fear and anxiety, which he saw as inhibitors to learning. He was all about reinforcement.
And he had this concept of shaping. This is something I see in video games all the time. It's everywhere once you know what to look for.
Oh, absolutely. Video games are the ultimate Skinner box. Shaping is the method of successive approximations.
That sounds fancy.
Just means you don't ask for the final perfect product on day one. You don't ask a kid to solve a complex algebra equation immediately. That would be overwhelming. First, you reinforce them just for sitting at their desk with a pencil.
Okay.
Then you reinforce them for writing down the numbers correctly. Then for doing the first step of the problem, you reward small steps.
It's like teaching a kid to shoot a basketball. You don't start them out at the three-point line.
Right. You start them right under the hoop. They make it. You cheer like crazy. That's positive reinforcement. Then you have them take one step back. They make it. You cheer again. You are shaping the behavior by reinforcing these small steps that get closer and closer to the final goal.
And this filtered directly into the classroom through things like mastery learning and direct instruction.
It did, completely. The whole idea of breaking content into tiny, bite-sized sequential units. You learn one small thing, you get tested on it, you get immediate feedback, you get a reward, you move to the next tiny unit.
And if you fail, you don't move on. You have to recycle through that same unit until you master it.
Precisely. It's the drill and kill software we all know.
Yeah.
And, the modern descendants of Skinner's teaching machines, and yes, he literally built mechanical machines for this in the 50s, are those apps where you solve a math problem, you get a ding, and a little badge pops up, and you move to the next one. It's highly efficient for certain kinds of learning.
But it feels a little soulless. I mean, we're treating the student as a mechanism to be programmed. There's no room for creativity or thought.
Well, that's the central criticism. It treats the mind as a black box. Behaviorists explicitly say, we don't care what's happening inside your head. We don't care about your feelings or your thoughts or your understanding. We only care about the input, the stimulus, and the output, the behavior.
Which brings us perfectly to our second big school of thought. Because eventually, people started asking, hey, what is happening inside the black box?
Exactly. Enter cognitive psychology.
So if behaviorism is the architecture of habit, cognitive psychology is opening up the hood to see how the engine actually works.
That's the shift right there. Cognitive theory acknowledges that the learner does something with the information. We don't just react. We encode it, we store it, we retrieve it, we transform it. We're active processors of information.
And one of the first people to really challenge the behaviorist view in a practical classroom setting was Maria Montessori.
A fascinating figure. And it's so important to remember, She didn't start with elite, wealthy families. She started with children in psychiatric clinics in Rome who were considered uneducable or mentally deficient by the standards of the day.
And she proved everyone wrong. She proved they could learn.
She did, but her approach was the complete antithesis of the factory model. There's a great quote in our sources where she criticizes the traditional school desk. She compares children sitting in those rigid rows to butterflies mounted on pins fastened in their perfect lifelessness.
Wow, that is a haunting image. It makes you realize how unnatural sitting in a row for 6 hours a day really is for a child.
It is. She wanted to liberate the child, but, and this is key, not through chaos. It wasn't just a free-for-all. It was through a scientific pedagogy. She created a meticulously prepared environment.
And she focused heavily on sensory input.
Massively. The sandpaper letters, the colored beads, the different size blocks. She realized that cognitive development starts with the senses. You build the abstract concept from the concrete reality. You touch the rough texture of the sandpaper letter A while you're saying the sound. You are building a multisensory map in the brain, not just a visual one.
And unlike the behaviorists who wanted to mold the child to society's needs, like Franklin Bobbitt, who basically said schools should produce efficient workers for the economy, Montessori wanted to nurture the child's natural development.
Which leads us directly to the giant of developmental psychology, Jean Piaget.
Piaget changed everything. Before him, people largely viewed children as just mini adults who just knew less stuff.
Right. They thought a child's brain was the same as an adult's, just emptier. Piaget came along and said, no, their brains actually function in a fundamentally different way. They go through distinct qualitative stages of development.
You have the sensorimotor stage, the pre-operational stage, the concrete operational.
And this matters for curriculum because it implies there are real limitations. You literally cannot teach a child abstract logic before they are developmentally ready. It's not about reinforcement. It's about biological maturation. You can give a 5-year-old all the cookies in the world, but they cannot grasp the concept of conservation of volume because the hardware isn't built yet.
I want to pause on his concepts assimilation and accommodation because the sources flag these as the two engines of all learning, but I always mix them up. How do we distinguish them in a simple way?
It's crucial to get this right because it's the core of his theory. Think of your brain as a massive filing cabinet. You have folders or schemas for everything you know. Let's say a toddler has a folder labeled dog.
Okay.
And in that folder, the criteria are furry, 4 legs, has a tail, barks.
Simple enough.
So the toddler goes to the park and sees a golden retriever. It's furry, has 4 legs, has a tail. The brain says match. It assimilates that new animal into the existing dog folder. No stress. It fits. The world makes sense.
Okay. So assimilation is easy filing. It fits into an existing box.
Exactly. But then the toddler goes to a farm and sees a cow.
Okay. Furry. 4 legs. Tail. Checks a lot of the boxes.
Exactly. So the kid points and confidently yells, "Dog!"
Which is wrong, but it makes sense based on their current system.
It's wrong, but it's logically consistent with their current filing system. But then the cow says, "Moo," and the cow is 6 feet tall, and the cow has an udder. The data isn't fitting anymore.
So now we have a crisis, a mental glitch.
This is what Piaget calls disequilibrium. The input doesn't fit the folder. The child has a choice. They can ignore the new info, which we adults do all the time, sadly, with confirmation bias, or they can force the brain to change. They had to open the cabinet, create a new folder, label it cow, and maybe go back and adjust the dog folder to add criteria like is small and barks.
And that restructuring, that is accommodation.
That is accommodation. And Piaget argues that that moment of struggle, that disequilibrium, is the only time we actually learn. If you're just assimilating, you aren't really growing. You're just adding more examples to your existing folders. Accommodation changes the architecture of your mind.
So how did this actually change the way curriculum was designed?
It meant you had to sequence things based on these developmental stages. You can't just throw information at kids. This influenced people like Jerome Bruner in a huge way.
Bruner is big on the structure of discipline, right? What does that actually mean?
It means that you shouldn't just be teaching kids to memorize facts, which is a very behaviorist goal. You should be teaching them to think like a historian or think like a physicist.
So it's about the process, not just the product.
Exactly. You need to understand the underlying structure of the subject, the core concepts, the methods of inquiry. How does a scientist form a hypothesis? That's more important than memorizing the periodic table.
And he gave us the spiral curriculum.
Which is a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
The idea that you can teach any subject to any child at any stage of development in some intellectually honest form.
How does that work? You just said we can't teach calculus to a 5-year-old.
You can't teach the formal equations, but you can teach the concept of change over time. You can teach the basic concept of gravity to a first grader by having them drop a ball and see what happens.
Okay.
Then you revisit it in 5th grade with more complexity, maybe measuring the speed of falling objects. Then you come back to it again in high school physics with Newton's formulas. You spiral back to the same core idea, adding depth and complexity each time as the child develops.
That makes so much sense. It feels much more organic than the mastery learning checklists of behaviorism.
It is. And it aligns perfectly with constructivism. This is a huge buzzword in education for the last few decades. The core idea is that learners construct their own meaning. Knowledge isn't just poured into their heads like they're empty vessels. They have to build it themselves based on their experiences.
We have a great example in the sources about this, an inquiry-based lesson where students are given a painting called The Subway and a short story, The Lottery, and they have to use both to answer the question, is ignorance bliss?
Right. Now, in a behaviorist classroom, the teacher would stand up and say, ignorance is not bliss, and here are 3 reasons why. Please write them down.
And if you repeat them back correctly on the test, you get a gold star.
Exactly. In a constructivist classroom, the teacher presents the raw materials, the art, the text, and poses the question. The students have to build the answer. They have to wrestle with it. They have to synthesize information and create the connection themselves. The teacher is a guide, not a dispenser of facts.
And Lev Vygotsky sits in here too, doesn't he?
Absolutely. While Piaget was really focused on the individual child's biological stages, Vygotsky was looking at the social environment. He argued that learning is fundamentally social. We learn through language and interaction with more knowledgeable others.
So it's not just me and my brain. It's me, my brain, and everyone around me.
Yes. Your culture provides the tools for thought language being the most important one. You learn by talking, by collaborating, by being guided through a problem by a parent or a teacher.
And now, modern neuroscience is backing all of this up, isn't it? We can actually see the learning happening in the brain.
We can. It's incredible. New imaging technology like fMRI allows us to see synaptic connections forming in real time. It confirms that experience physically changes the brain. It's called plasticity. Every time you accommodate new information, you are physically rewiring your hardware. It's not a metaphor anymore.
Speaking of rewiring, we have to talk about technology. One of the sources makes a really interesting point that the internet is changing how we think, moving from linear book-based processing to hypertext thinking.
This is a critical point for anyone designing curriculum today. For centuries, our curriculum has been linear. You read chapter 1, then chapter 2, then chapter 3 like a book.
One thing after another.
But the internet isn't a book. It's a web. You start reading an article, you click a link that takes you somewhere else, you click another link.
I do this all the time. I start reading about Napoleon, click a link about the geography of France, click a link about French bread, and 20 minutes later, I'm reading a deep dive on yeast fermentation.
That is hypertext thinking. And it's not necessarily good or bad, but it is different. It changes how we need to design curriculum. If students are processing information in a web-like structure, we can't just feed them a single line of text anymore. We need to help them learn how to navigate the web, how to filter, how to synthesize, how to not get lost down the rabbit hole of yeast.
It sounds like cognitive psychology gave us back the mind. But did it give us back the person? Because you can still treat the mind like a computer, a very complex, fascinating computer, but a computer nonetheless.
That is the perfect transition. Because you are absolutely right. Cognitive psychology explains the process, but it can still be a bit cold. It focuses on the knower. But what about the feeler? What about the person who is sad or angry or anxious or inspired?
Where's the humanity?
Exactly. And that's where the third force comes in.
Phenomenology and humanistic psychology.
This is the reaction against both the machine of behaviorism and the computer of cognitivism. This is about the human, the subjective experience.
The whole person.
Precisely. This school of thought draws on things like Gestalt theory.
The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I remember that from Psych 101.
Right. If you listen to a symphony, you don't just hear a sequence of isolated notes, A, then C, then F sharp. You hear a melody. You hear emotion. You hear a pattern. If you break it down into just the notes, like a behaviorist might, you lose the essence.
So for curriculum, that means you can't just teach math and reading and history in their own little boxes.
Right. A humanist would argue for interdisciplinary teaching. You have to integrate subjects to show the big picture, the whole pattern.
And the big names here are Maslow and Rogers.
Abraham Maslow. We all know the hierarchy of needs. It's one of those things that's seeped into the popular culture.
Food and water and safety at the bottom, then belonging, then esteem, and self-actualization way up at the top.
And the implication for schools is massive and honestly just common sense. If a student is hungry or scared for their safety or feels like they don't belong, they cannot learn effectively. Their brain isn't available for higher order thinking. You have to address the basic needs first.
But the ultimate goal of curriculum for Maslow isn't just job skills or content knowledge.
No, it's self-actualization. The purpose of education is to help the individual become the best, most complete version of themselves, to help them reach their full potential.
And Carl Rogers took this into the classroom with his idea of non-directive teaching.
Rogers was a therapist first, remember? And he viewed teaching in a very similar way to therapy. The teacher isn't the sage on the stage who has all the answers. They are a facilitator of learning. They create a safe, empathetic environment and help the student explore their own interests and find their own answers.
This can get pretty radical. We have the example in the sources of the Summerhill School.
Summerhill is the extreme end of the spectrum, for sure. It was a school in England run by A.S. Neal, and the core principle was that attendance at lessons was optional.
Optional. So if I'm a 12-year-old and I decide I want to play soccer all day, I just play soccer.
Correct. Neal believed that if you created a loving, supportive environment and let children alone, they would naturally choose to learn when they were ready and interested. He didn't care about exam scores. He defined success as a graduate working joyfully at whatever they chose to do.
That sounds amazing, but also, did they learn anything? Or did they just play soccer for 6 years and then have to go out into the real world?
Well, that's a big debate, isn't it? Neal would argue they learned how to be happy, how to be self-motivated, how to be well-adjusted humans, which he saw as more important than algebra. But it brings up this whole issue of social and emotional intelligence.
We have to talk about Source 36, because we've been talking about input and output and filing cabinets and schemas. It's all very sterile and academic. And then I hit this transcript from a group of adolescent girls in a UK school talking about their day. And honestly, it felt like I was right back in high school and my stomach just dropped.
It's a hard read. It's raw. It's real.
Let me read this one part properly. A girl says, "The school bitch was so foul to me, I'd go home feeling sick. Then other days she acted like my best friend and I didn't know where I stood." And then she says this, which just stopped me in my tracks. "I spent more time worrying about who I was sitting next to at lunch than I did about my GCSEs."
That right there. That is the hidden curriculum. That's the real curriculum for her.
It's tragic, though, because you have these well-meaning teachers spending hours designing the perfect cognitive lesson plan on Shakespeare, breaking it down, scaffolding it, using all the best practices.
And the student isn't hearing a single word of it. Because her amygdala, the fear and emotion center of her brain, is firing like a 4-alarm fire because of a look someone gave her in the hallway.
And Maslow would look at this and say, of course she's not learning Shakespeare. It's impossible.
Right. He'd point directly to his hierarchy. She doesn't have safety. She doesn't have belonging. You cannot skip to the top of the pyramid, self-actualization or intellectual achievement, if the foundation is crumbling beneath you.
So if you're a humanist educator, you don't punish her for not paying attention in class.
No. A behaviorist might give her a demerit. A cognitivist might try to make the content more engaging. But a humanist asks, how do we fix the environment? How do we address the social dynamics? The first priority is asking, how does it feel to be a student in this room? Because if it feels unsafe, the brain literally shuts down learning.
So a humanistic curriculum prioritizes self-concept. It prioritizes emotional health over content mastery in a way.
It does. It validates those feelings. It brings them into the classroom. We see examples of reflective journaling in the sources. There's a heartbreaking entry from a student writing about abuse.
What happened that day at school will be engraved in my mind forever. I just have to keep filling the pages of my life with happy memories.
It's powerful stuff. In a behaviorist system, that's irrelevant data. In a cognitive system, it's maybe a processing error or a distraction. But in a humanistic system, helping that student process that emotion is the learning. It's about building resilience.
Which connects to positive psychology, the idea of optimism versus pessimism.
Exactly. Positive psychology tells us that optimism is a learned skill, not just a personality trait. A curriculum should actively teach resilience. It should teach students how to bounce back from failure, how to interpret setbacks, not just how to pass a test and move on.
So, okay, we have the machine, which is behaviorism, the computer, which is cognitivism, and the soul, which is humanism. But we can't just pick one, can we? I mean, I don't want a surgeon who was trained at a Summerhill-style school where anatomy was optional because they didn't feel like it that day.
That is the crucial point. And that brings us to the modern synthesis. The modern classroom in any good learning design is usually an eclectic mix of all three. It's not an either-or.
We use behaviorism for classroom management.
Right. You walk into almost any elementary classroom, you see a point system or sticker chart, or you see drill and practice apps for learning multiplication tables. That's pure Skinner. And for some things like rote memorization or building fluency with immediate feedback, it works beautifully. You want a pilot to have rote memorized the emergency procedures. You want that stimulus response to be automatic.
And we use cognitivism for the overall structure.
Exactly. We use Piaget stages to sequence the math curriculum, so we aren't trying to teach abstract algebra to 6-year-olds. We use Bruner's spiral idea to revisit topics with increasing complexity. We use constructivism to design those big, inquiry-based projects.
And humanism, where does that fit in the modern classroom?
Hopefully we use humanism to remember why we are doing all of this.
Yeah.
And practically we use it to differentiate our instruction for the learner.
Differentiated instruction. That's a big term in the sources. What does it look like in practice?
It is. It's the recognition that the learner profile we talked about at the beginning isn't a single person. It's a room full of 30 different people with different readiness levels, different interests, and different ways of learning.
There's a great example in the sources of a role-play activity, a doctor and patient scenario.
Yes. This is a perfect example of differentiation. The core concept is the same for everyone. Diagnose a problem. But you can differentiate the task based on the student. Maybe the student who struggles with writing just has to give a verbal diagnosis and explain their reasoning. Maybe the student who is right on grade level has to fill out a simple diagnostic form. And maybe the advanced student has to write a full, formal medical report citing evidence. They are all engaging with the same core concept, but the curriculum is tailored to their individual needs. That's humanistic. It respects the individual within the group.
And technology plays a huge role in this modern mix now.
It does. But we have to be careful. There's a really important warning in the sources about the myth of the digital native.
Oh, the idea that just because kids are born with iPads in their hands, they instinctively know how to use them for learning.
Right. Source 23 quotes Spider-Man, of all things. With great power comes great responsibility. Just because a student can swipe a screen and find a YouTube video doesn't mean they can critically analyze a source, detect bias, or use the internet responsibly and ethically. Curriculum has to explicitly teach that. We have to balance the drill-and-kill behaviorist apps with creative, constructive tools where students are making videos or building websites or collaborating on wikis.
So what does this all mean? We've gone on this journey from the cat in the cage to the child in the garden with Montessori to the self-actualizing human. What's the takeaway?
It means that curriculum is an incredibly powerful tool. And it's not just for teachers, whether you are a parent, a manager at work, or just someone trying to learn a new language or a new skill for yourself. You are constantly designing curriculum. You're making choices based on one of these theories, whether you know it or not.
If I'm trying to train my dog, I'm probably being a behaviorist.
100%. You're using treats and repetition. That's shaping. Don't try to reason with the dog about the structure of discipline. It won't work.
But if I'm trying to learn a complex new theory for work, I need to be a cognitivist with myself. I need to structure it, map it out, connect it to what I already know. I need to accommodate it.
Exactly. And if you were trying to lead a team or raise a child to be a good person, you need to be a humanist. You need to look at the whole person. You need to make sure they feel safe and valued and heard so they can learn and grow.
It's about having the right tool for the right job and knowing which tool you're using.
It is. Because if we treat learning purely as data input, just cognitivism, we miss the heart. If we treat it purely as a system of rewards and punishments, behaviorism, we miss the soul. We need all three working together.
I want to leave everyone with a final thought that really stuck with me from our sources. There's this mention of the accidental curriculum.
Yes. The things we teach without meaning to teach them. The hidden lessons.
The idea that we can spend all this time planning these perfect lessons, but students also learn from the environment, from the rules, from the hidden signals we send every day.
That's the most provocative part for me. You might stand up and teach a brilliant lesson on democracy in your civics class. That's the formal cognitive plan. But if your classroom is run like a dictatorship, where the teacher is a supreme leader and students have no voice and are punished for questioning authority, that is the behaviorist and environmental reality. So what is the student actually learning?
They're learning that power matters more than democracy, that what you say doesn't matter as much as what you do.
Exactly. They're learning the accidental curriculum.
That is the question to end on. In our own lives, in our workplaces, in our families, are we teaching them to be free thinkers? Or are we just teaching them to sit in the row and wait for the bell?
It forces us to look in the mirror, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What is the hidden curriculum of your own life? What habits are you reinforcing? What meaning are you constructing? What kind of environment are you creating for the people around you?
That is plenty to chew on. Go forth and design your own curriculum wisely. Thanks for diving in with us.
See you next time.